Hi, today I want to share some thoughts with you on there is no plan B. And there's times in your life and my life when we don't give our very best because in the back of our minds we have a plan B ready to go if plan A doesn't work. And there's times when you're tempted to be intimidated, maybe out of your mind, but you push forward ahead because you know it's the right thing to do. And it's really important to surround yourself with people that will encourage you and motivate you and inspire you to keep moving forward and not retreat back into plan B, C, D, E, or F. Let me share a story that I heard a while back. It says one day on the plains of Africa, a young buffalo named Walter, he was approached his dad and asked him if there was anything that he should be afraid of. "Only lions, my son," his dad responded. "Oh yes, I've heard about lions. If I ever see one, I'll turn and run as fast as I can," said Walter. "No, that's the worst thing you can do," said Dad. "You see, why? Dad, they're scary and they're going to try to kill me." The dad smiled and explained, "Walter, if you run away, the lions will chase you and catch you. And when they do, they'll jump on your unprotected back and bring you down." "So what should I do?" asked Walter. "Well, if you ever see a lion, stand your ground and show him that you're not afraid. If he doesn't move away, show him your sharp horns and stomp the ground with your hooves. If that does not work, then slowly move toward him. If that doesn't work, charge him and hit him with everything you've got." "That's crazy. I'll be terrified to do that. What if he attacks my back?" said the startled young buffalo. "Look around, Walter. What do you see?" Walter looked around at the rest of the herd, and there were about 200 massive beasts, all armed with sharp horns and huge shoulders. Then Dad spoke some wisdom. He said, if you're ever afraid, if you're ever terrified, know that we are here. If you panic and run from your fears, we can't save you, he said. But if you charge towards them, we'll be right behind you. The young buffalo breathed deeply and nodded. "Thanks, Dad. I think I understand." Again, the text today is called "There is no plan B." In the Bible, over in 1 Kings chapter 16, reading from the New American Standard, this story happened a few thousand years ago. But there's some lessons in this story that apply to you and I right now. Again, 1 Kings chapter 16, starting in verse number 29. "Now Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah." Skip down to verse 30. "Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, in fact, more evil than all the people before him. So it came about as it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of the people that went before him." So skip down to verse 32. "So he, Ahab, erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria." So let's kind of widen the screen a little bit. Baal was a small g god that people built and worshipped by the thousands. I mean, thousands and thousands of these people worshipped this small g god. So in verse 33, it says, "Ahab also made other objects. So Ahab did more to provoke God than all the kings of Israel who were before him." Now there's times in your life and my life that you're going to be challenged to either put up or shut up, to either move forward toward the situations and the goals that you have, or to run in the other direction because it's so intimidating and frankly so terrifying for some of us. Now there's always going to be a measure of hesitancy in your life and my life if you have plan B in your back pocket. That is, if you have an option to continue to have plan B, C, D, E, and F as a backup in the event that plan A does not work. So total and absolute commitment changes the entire world. Again, total and absolute commitment changes the entire world. So you must be at least mentally prepared to push forward full steam ahead, where there's nothing that's going to back you up, as in plan B, C, D, or E. So you have to understand that one day, just one situation, one person walking into your life, one change in your employment status, one relationship that walks into your life can change your life overnight. Now, this story of Ahab happened about 9 centuries before Jesus Christ was born. It happened about 100 years after King David was king over Israel. So skip down to 1 Kings chapter 17. Now, back in that culture, in that time, in that country, there were people called prophets, and these prophets spoke from God to attempt to get the people to worship God, the God of heaven. So in 1 Kings chapter 17, New American Standard Bible says this: "Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab." Now let me just pause here. Think about the relationship that some of these prophets had with the kings of that area. So Elijah had the authority, he had the reputation that could even go and see a king. So he said to Ahab, "As the Lord of God of Israel lives, whom I stand, surely there's going to be neither dew nor rain in these years except by my word." So then God came and spoke to Elijah and said, "Run away," in verse 3, "go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of Jordan." Now, can you imagine the rage that Ahab was feeling against Elijah? Because in that country, in that region, water or rainfall impacted the economy of that country, because we're talking a few thousand years ago now, that without rain, then the economy stopped. There were no crops to be brought in. They couldn't plant seeds, and that trickled down to other parts of the economy. So what Elijah was saying was literally going to cripple the economy of Ahab. So Ahab was obviously enraged. So can you imagine how, when you go through struggles in your life, and certainly in my life, that there's two sides of risk. There's the fear side, which certainly it incorporates hesitation and anxiety and doubt and sweaty palms, frankly, and excuses. But then there's the other side of risk that all of us have at different times in our lives, and that includes victory, that includes elation, the big one is satisfaction. When you're able to achieve something tremendous, at least in your own mind, it gives you a feeling of satisfaction and confidence and resilience, and then you learn from those difficulties and those struggles that come your way, because you've chosen to run toward the struggle instead of running the other direction. Again, here we're talking about there is no plan B. So you can live on one side of risk, the fearful side of risk, or the other side of risk, which gives you courage and satisfaction. So what side of risk should you be on in your own life? So let's continue the story about Elijah. It says in verse 4, "It shall be that you will drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there." Verse 5, "So then he did according to the word of the Lord, and there he went and lived by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan River." The brooks was there, and the ravens brought him food and meat in the morning and bread in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. Now verse 7, it says, "It happened after a while that the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land." So again, let me back up a little bit. So Ahab was told by Elijah that because you built these small g idols to these gods, that God's going to cut off the rain in the country for a very long time. Ahab got obviously angry, so God told Elijah to hit the road and run and hang out at this other place until I tell you to move forward. So it seems that God knows where the resources are if we're going to pay attention. Let me say that again slowly. It seems that God knows where the resources are for you and me if we pay attention. And I'm certainly not suggesting that there's lessons and there's direction everywhere you go. But if our minds are cluttered with stuff, and if we're not paying attention to what's going on around us, then we're going to miss the signs, certainly, of opportunities that are around us all the time. Now, in the next part of the story, there's someone that's been offered an opportunity to provide resources, which in turn not only changed Elijah's life, but also changed her family's life. Now, there's going to come a time in your life, and I know I've dealt with it, I can't tell you how many times, that when you have this fear of loss, or this anxiety that whatever you're going to attempt is not going to work, then it's going to keep you in this safe zone, this zone of comfort, this zone of, I'm not going to make any waves. I'm not going to rock the boat because I'm very comfortable here. Well, comfort doesn't really get good things done. So the threat of doing without, the threat of doing without certainly sometimes keeps people from reaching out to other people. It kind of reminds me of sometimes how you go through life and you want to hoard and keep everything that's been acquired by you over the years. Whereas people who have learned the benefit of giving and sharing, when you open up your heart and your mind and your hands to other people, then guess what? Stuff comes to you as well. But if you hoard it, if you keep it together, if you're afraid of sharing what you have, then guess what's going to happen? You're not going to be able to get more. So people fear missing out instead of embracing possibilities. Let's continue this story. In 1 Kings chapter 17, now I'm in verse 8. It says, "Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, Arise and go to this other town, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow of all people, there to provide for you." So he arose and went to this other little town, and when he came to the gate of the city, there was a woman there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, "Please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink." Now verse 11. As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, "Please bring me also a piece of bread in your hand." But, in verse 12 she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar, that I might go in and prepare it for her and her son," because that's all they had, and after that was gone, they were going to eventually die, the story says. Verse 13. Then Elijah said to her, "Do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little cake from it first and bring it out to me, and afterward take one for yourself and for your son." Now from a guy's point of view, would I want to take the last bit of food from a widow and her son? My manhood wouldn't allow me to do that. But Elijah was under a different set of directions. Verse 14. So God said, according to the scripture, "The bowl of flour shall not be exhausted." This is what Elijah's telling the widow and her son. "The bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth." So she went, and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and her household ate for many days. Now let's just really go back a minute here. Now in 1 Kings 17, verse 8, it said that God had already commanded this woman to provide for Elijah. Now, I frankly can't blame this woman for having second thoughts or doubts, because if it was me, I'd feel the same way. I would certainly look at this from an angle of lack, of not having enough already, and then you want me to share it with this stranger? So again, back to 1 Kings, verse 16. "Now the bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar become empty, according to the word of the Lord that God spoke through Elijah." The story continues, verse 17. "Now it came about after these things that the son of the widow, got sick, and he died." Now that's a reputation that I wouldn't have. First of all, mom helped this guy, and then the woman's son got sick and died. I would be a little bit uptight about that. Verse 18. "So she said to Elijah, 'What do I have to do with you, O man of God? And have you come to me the text says, to bring my iniquity and to bring death to my family?'" It's so easy when you're down to blame others for your struggles and then start to not take responsibility for your own actions. And then you manufacture the whys behind bad things are happening. So if it was me, I would frankly feel the same way that this woman did, that this guy came into my life, I did what I was told that I should do, and then as payment for it, my son died. I'd be pretty bent out of shape over it. So it's so easy, again, when you're down to blame other people. So in verse 19 it says this, he said to her, "Give me your son." Then he took him from her bosom and carried him up to the upper room where he was living. So he was living in that household, but he had, let's call it an apartment on the second floor, okay? Now, you can obviously assume the terror that was going through this mom's eyes, this absolute horror that her son passed away. So the story continues down in verse 20. It says, he called, that is, Elijah called to God and said, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity to the widow with whom I'm staying by causing her son to die?" So, and then this is a prophet. This is a guy who has an intimate relationship with God up in heaven, that God was doing great things by these prophets way back then. In verse 21, it says, "Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called out to God. He said, 'Oh God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him.'" So verse 22, "The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he was revived." So long story short, I think, in this situation is that sometimes we get paralyzed when we're hit suddenly with fear. We get intimidated when things come our way, and that's just, I think, human nature. That things come at us so fast and so suddenly that we get intimidated by it. F.B. Meyer wrote one time, the paralysis, listen, the paralysis that can occur when we don't know what's around the corner can be terrifying. He says, "What is true of the natural qualities of the soul is very true of faith. So long as we're quietly at rest amid the surroundings and undisturbed things around us," but he says, listen to this, "but when we are pushed out from all these surroundings with suddenly nothing but God to look to, then faith grows suddenly, like a cable, like a monarch oak, like a master principle of life," he says. He says, "As long as the bird lingers by the nest, it will not know the luxury of flight. As long as the trembling boy holds to the bank or toes the bottom, he'll not learn the ecstasy of battling the ocean wave." Again, the text today is there's no plan B. Darren Polk wrote, he says, "Do we take the risk of crossing over knowing that we could slip, fail, or suffer pain along the way? Or do we stay where we are, feeling secure, but knowing that we will never get to where we want to be in life?" So the story continues here in 1 Kings chapter 18. Now, a long time passed, and we're talking about 3 years to be exact, that the drought was now over, and this message was given to Elijah. It says, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, because I'm about to make it rain in the country." So Elijah set out to present himself to Ahab, and there was again, this drought was so severe. So if you want to kind of fast forward a bit over to 1 Kings chapter 19, then there came a time when Ahab's wife, Jezebel, got really bent out of shape, because a chapter or 2 prior to that, there's some stuff that happened. I'm not going to get into the detail of it here, but some really bad things happened to the small g gods of that region that Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, worshipped. So she got pretty ticked off. So in 1 Kings 19, in verse 3, it says, "When Elijah heard about these things, he ran for his life." And then he hid out in a cave, and then he got discouraged, which that happens to you and me often, I think. When things aren't going the way we want them to go, he said something like, "Enough of this, God, I can't take anymore." And then he forgot that somebody told him, not that far prior to that, because Elijah thought that he was the only one left. He was the only prophet. He was the only good guy in that entire culture. But he was reminded, even before he started whining and complaining that he was the only one left, that somebody reminded him that there was a couple hundred people like him around him that he didn't even meet yet. And I think that it's really essential that you and I manage and leverage our strength. We have to manage our minds. We have to manage the words that we use. Because if we don't manage what's going up here, then when the emotional drought hits you and it hits me, then we're going to implode. And I think that's happened to you. I know it's happened to me quite a number of times, that we implode when things happen suddenly, when disaster happens, when struggles happen, when unemployment happens, when illness hits your family. You just want to implode. Chris Gardner wrote one time, there's no plan B for passion. Again, there's no plan B for passion. So when you feel like there's a possibility of failure, then the passion for plan A dissipates. Again, when you're tempted to think that maybe if I try this, I'm going to fall on my face, then plan B just, it becomes to the forefront, and then plan A just disappears. John Maxwell wrote one time, when you feel like there's a possibility of failure, the plan B just, like I said, disappears. He also says that you have to have no plan B. You have to get up in the morning and say, you know what, no matter what's going to happen, I'm going to push through and do the extraordinary, even though at the time I don't feel so extraordinary. And sometimes you and I have the temptation to quit when we're just so close to breaking through victory. We're so close to reaching the goal that we've been trying to achieve for such a long time. So what's the difference between those who have tried and failed and given up and they've maybe tried hundreds of times, knowing that one day it might be their day? Now, there's answers to that question. The answers are the ones who persisted, the ones who kept their why in front of them. That's another sermon for another day. But if you don't keep your why in front of you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that gets you up in the morning, that gets you to keep fighting and doing the extraordinary, then every little thing that comes your way is going to absolutely tear you apart. These people, they work harder than their peers. They read consistently about people who have been there and done that. They surround themselves with people who keep reminding them to get back up again. I can't say that enough times, that you have to surround yourself with people that are frankly smarter than you, earn more than you do, because if you don't do that, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to allow the people around you, I could be so bold, the turkeys around you, to keep you away from flying with the eagles. And other people can't do that for you. Only you can do that for yourself, because you have to be adamant about keeping the right kind of people around you. Because if not, then some of the negative people around you will say, hey, you know what? You have to have plan B, you have to plan C and D, and all the way up through the alphabet, which then by the time you get to G, H, and I, then you're going to forget about the initial goal that you had, the initial dream, the initial passion that you had, because you realize that the people around you don't believe that you can do it. That's really critical. You have to stay away from people who do not believe that you can get stuff done. I'm telling you, flat out, I can tell you from my own experience. You have to separate yourself from the people that believe in you and from the people who are, frankly, that they don't know that they don't know. Again, that's another sermon too. But there's a lot of people around who don't know that they don't know. Stay away from those people. Theodore Roosevelt said one time, courage is not having the strength to go on. It is going on when you don't have strength. Let me share it again. Courage is not having the strength to go on. It is going on when you don't have the strength. That means getting up when you don't feel like getting up. Lifting that weight when you know what, you don't think you can lift another weight. Making another phone call for your job, or applying for another position when you don't think that maybe you have it in you. But you do it anyway. Consistency, I can't say it enough times. Consistency will absolutely transform your life in a huge way. But you have to be steady at what you're trying to accomplish. There cannot be a plan B in your life, and certainly not a plan C or D. When you talk to people that have had drug problems, and they're part of Narcotics Anonymous, they have this manual. And in that manual, there's a piece that grabbed my attention. It says this, quote, do we really want to be rid of our resentments, our anger, our fear? Many of us cling to our fears and doubts and self-loathing or hatred because There is a certain distorted security in familiar pain. Again, there is a certain distorted security in familiar pain. Listen to this. It seems safer to embrace what we know than to let go of it for fear of the unknown. How many people in your life want you to stay in the little bubble? They want you to stay in that little box because they've stayed in their little box for the last 60, 70, 80 years. Because outside of that little box can be a little scary. How many times haven't you wanted to do the extraordinary, but because of the people around you, they have kept you from doing the extraordinary? I'm telling you, as well as I know who I am, you have to choose your friends more carefully. You have to choose people in your life that believe in you, that will encourage you, that will inspire you to get up and keep going, even though you've been knocked down 100,000 times. I'm telling you that you and I have the opportunity to change people's lives if you continue to believe that there is no plan B. Let me end with a story that I read from a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. You may have heard it. It says, "I'll never forget the night in 1946 when disaster challenged and really almost destroyed our lives. My brother George came home from football practice and collapsed with a 104-degree temperature. After an examination, the doctor informed us it was polio. This was before the days of Dr. Salk, and polio was well known in Webster, Missouri, having killed or crippled many kids and teenagers. After the crisis had passed, the doctor felt it was his duty to inform George of this horrible truth. I hate to tell it to you, son, he said, but the polio has taken such a toll that you'll probably never walk again. Without a limp, or your left arm will be useless." George had always envisioned himself as a championship wrestler in his senior year, but just missing the championship the year before. Barely able to speak, George whispered, "Doctor?" Yes, the doctor leaned over his bed. "What is it, my boy?" Well, I can't say what he told him, but he told him to go somewhere. So it sounded like the boy's voice was full of determination. The next day, the nurse walked into the room and to find him lying flat on his face on the floor. He said, the nurse is saying, like, "What's going on?" He says, "I'm walking," the boy calmly replied. He refused the use of any braces or even a crutch. Sometimes it would take him 20 minutes to get out of the chair, but he refused any help or any offers of aid. I remember seeing him lift a tennis ball with as much effort as a healthy man would lift a 100-pound barbell. I also remember seeing him step out on the mat as captain of the wrestling team. But the story doesn't stop there. The following year, after being named to start in Missouri Valley College as one of the first football games to be televised locally, he came down with mononucleosis. It was my brother Bob who helped reinforce George's already strong philosophy of never giving up. The family was sitting in his room in the hospital when Valley's quarterback completed a 12-yard pass to the tight end, and the announcer said, "And George makes the first catch of the game." Shocked, we all looked at the bed to make sure George was still in the bed. Then we realized that what had happened, Bob, who had also made the starting lineup, had worn George's number so George could spend the afternoon, listen, hearing himself catching 6 passes and making countless tackles. As he overcame mono, he did it with the lesson that Bob taught him that day. He says, there is always a way. George was destined, really, the story says, to spend the next 3 falls in the hospital. In 1948, it was after he stepped on a rusty nail. In 1949, he got tonsillitis, and just before he was able to sing in Phil's Harris. And in 1950, it was a 3rd-degree burns over 40% of his body and collapsed lungs. This guy had a very difficult time. His life had been saved by his brother Alan, who after an explosion had set George's, it just went crazy, the whole story says. But the end result here is after each challenge, listen, after each challenge, George came back. He came back stronger and more sure of his own ability that he could overcome any obstacle. You know, he understood that if it was going to be, it was up to him to get it done. He understood that there was no plan B. It was no way that he was going to surrender to difficulty. So as I close today, it's almost as if you have to get to the point of desperation and/or determination for there to be a no plan B mindset in your life. So keep working that one day that plan B will no longer be in your vocabulary, which the translation is that you're not going to quit no matter what comes your way, no matter what struggle, no matter what difficulty, no matter what disappointment is going to come down the road, you're not going to give up because there's no plan B.